Why did the USA and USSR become rivals in the period between 1945 and 1950? The Cold War was a period between the end of the Second World War and the 1990s, marked by a hostile relationship between the superpowers United States and the Soviet Union. The two powers, however, never directly fought each other, therefore the term Cold War. But there were a few extremely hot periods. Many historians see the different ideologies as the main cause of the Cold War. The Soviet Union was a communist nation, which believed in the state being in charge of the economy, whereas the United States was capitalist and believed in democracy and the free market. Other factors, such as the history before the two world wars, the personality of US President Harry Truman and Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, and the struggle for world dominance and power, also played a role in causing the Cold War. Moreover, different events in the years between 1945 and 1950, such as US financial aid to Europe, the dropping of the first atomic bomb, disagreements on how to settle the post-war world, Soviet expansion to Soviet Eastern Europe, and Berlin blockade were episodes that turned the former war allies into enemies. As the Second World War came to an end in 1945, disagreements that had only been suppressed surfaced once more. At the Potsdam and Yalta conferences, the superpowers disagreed on what to do with Poland and Germany after the war. They were also split over the creation of the atomic bomb. The USSR found out about USA's nuclear plan through spies, and this worsened the Russian-American relationship. The USA was now stronger of the two powers. In 1946, Stalin gave a speech where he attacked the Western powers and proclaimed his confidence in the eventual triumph of the Soviet system. Stalin argued that communism and capitalism were on a collision course. Some US politicians considered this speech to be a declaration of World War III. This further worsened the relationship between the two superpowers. It also resulted in a series of speeches, among them George Kennan's long telegram, which helped shape the US policy of containment through the Cold War. The Soviet Union wanted to turn Eastern Europe into communist states. Stalin was determined to turn Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria into satellite states regardless of what the West may think about violation of human rights and democracy. On March 12, 1947, President Harry Truman proclaimed that the United States would support Greece and Turkey economically and militarily to prevent them from falling under Soviet control. The next step came later in 1947. Europe was in ruins and in desperate need of economic aid after the war. The USA feared that the economic and political instability could open the way to communist domination. In both France and Italy, the communist governments were growing stronger. The US Secretary of State, George Marshall, reported from a conference in Moscow to the United States that Europe needed immediate help. The USA launched the Marshall Plans. This would expand the US market and make their economy boom, according to the USSR. They saw this as dollar imperialism. The US would gain power because Europe would be dependent on American goods and be in debt to the US. The Berlin blockade was another episode that turned the US and the Soviet Union against each other. In the first years after 1945, the Cold War was essentially revolved around the German question. The capital, Berlin, was divided between the Eastern and Western powers. Berlin soon became a hotspot in the Cold War, because this was the only place Soviet and American troops came face to face. The Soviets were determined to stop the British, French, and Americans from building up a strong and powerful Germany. In order to recreate the German economy, the Western powers launched a new currency in West Berlin, the Deutsche Mark. The Americans meant that currency and political power was synonymous, and in order to get the German economy up and going, they needed a new currency. The US did not tell the Soviets about their currency plans, and their lack of cooperation was seen as a hostile act by the Soviet Union. In the hope that Washington would reverse its policy in Germany, the Soviets blocked the trade routes to West Berlin. This was the American sphere of influence. The Berlin blockade lasted from June 1948 to May 1949. The Western powers had the choice of meeting the hostility with tanks and military power, but chose to keep West Berlin supplied with food, clothing, and raw materials through an Anglo-American airlift. The Berlin Crisis was the first major confrontation between the Soviet Union and the United States, and it could have resulted in an armed conflict. It is hard to define when the Cold War actually started and who is the one to blame. Some historians argue that it is a result of a power struggle, or a clash of ideologies, or just simply misunderstandings. Others blame either the US or the USSR alone. It is also hard to say when the Cold War actually started. The struggle between the superpowers had its root in long-standing disagreements between the two nations that dated back to the Russian Revolution of 1917. The Berlin blockade can be seen as the first major struggle between the two powers. However, the period of tension took a dramatic turn in August 1949, when the USA discovered that the Soviet Union had created the atomic bomb. Now the American nuclear monopoly was over, and the two nations were equal in power. When hearing President Truman's announcement of the end of the US monopoly on atomic weapons, chemist Harold Urey said, "There is only one thing worse than one nation having the atomic bomb. That's two nations having it." The world was now split between the two superpowers, and a Cold War was inevitable.